Okay, we will be starting the next session. The next session is by Ludovic, and the title is Scaling Engineering Teams Across Continents. Please, Ludovic.
All right, I think it should be better now. A very good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to be with you, DevOps Days Tokyo. The conference has been great so far, and I'm very glad today to share about a topic that is quite important for me, which is scaling engineering team across continents. And during the next few minutes, I would like to address two questions that I believe are critical when we build high-performing teams. The first question I would like to ask is, how can we scale without creating chaos, right? Because ultimately, when we scale by adding more people, by complexifying organizations, we also create chaos. And the second question I would like to answer is, when scaling globally, we span across different time zones. And how do we stay cohesive, consistent, coherent with this kind of organization? My name is Ludovic. I'm working as a VP of Engineering at Opensend. We are a US SaaS data platform. We help e-commerce brands to engage with their customers by offering a user journey. All right? And over the past 5 years, I have been working in Vietnam. And one of my key responsibilities was to build, scale, and operate distributed engineering team across various countries: Vietnam, Thailand, Egypt, Germany, Japan, and the US. And when you think about that, actually, you start about thinking about how we ship actually products, right? And when we kick off a product at the beginning, it's fairly small, right? You have a couple of features, you have a fairly small team, and it's a little bit like on this boat, right? In case you need to change the direction, it happens quickly. Everybody is aware about what is happening. We see the horizon. And at the beginning, it feels very comfortable because you know what you're doing, you are very close to the problem you want to solve. At some point, the product gets some tractions. You will need to structure teams, to hire a couple of specialists, to grow basically your boat, right? You can embed more people, you can have more clients, you have more features as well. But steering this boat starts to become a little bit more challenging. You need to coordinate. And in case you want to change the direction, it's a little bit slower, right? And at some point, you will massively scale your organization. And instead of having a single team, you have multiple teams. You have a huge carry-on capacity. You have a lot of features. You have different teams. You also have a lot of clients. And then you become risk averse, right? When you make a change, it has to be aligned. It has to be agreed. And suddenly you move much, much more slower than the first day when you kick off the product, right? And so basically when we scale an organization, it's less about hiring people, and it's more about how can we architect team structure, ensuring that we can keep delivering fast and we stay autonomous. When we think about scaling an organization, there is different metrics we can look at. One of them is the decision velocity. As the team grows, how many approvals are needed for an engineer to take actions? Because as the organization is growing and complexifying, you may have more and more approval layers from specialists, the design team, the architecture team, the security, the management, the business. And so this measure can enable us to understand what is happening. A second metric could be as well the context depth. How many layers are now separating the engineers that is trying to solve the problem from the actual user problem? How many translation layers do we have? How many product manager, business, sales, marketing are separating the customer from the engineer? And finally, the cognitive load. As the system gets bigger, how many areas must an engineer master and touch to deliver an outcome? So there is a lot of way actually to look at how we can scale engineering teams, but I strongly believe that those three metrics, those three symptoms. They are very helpful to understand what is happening. And this is not something about what we can do with AI, right? If suddenly you are able to write code much faster, to ship faster, if it takes ages in the organization to approve changes, you have not solved anything. And I think I want to reinforce what has been said this morning in one of the sessions. AI is just a multiplier. It's an accelerator about the structure and the healthiness of your organization. If you have terrible structure, bad communications, bad structure, bad coordinations, AI will not solve anything of that. You will just solve faster the wrong problems, and you will just accelerate the waiting time on the wrong things. When we think about this, actually, it's very easy to visualize that. Coming back to what we said a few minutes ago, when we have a very small team, decisions, they are made in hours or minutes. It's very easy to understand what we are trying to solve as a problem. And as well, we can understand the system because it's not too complex, right? I can master a lot of things in my stack. As we start to grow, maybe the cognitive load is affected. I need to master maybe different languages, different platforms, different components. If I add more people, suddenly it's get bigger and more complex to make decisions. And if I reach a certain level, basically all the metrics, they start to really decline significantly. When we decide to go globally, I think it's even worse, actually. It's even worse because all these metrics, they will reach a turning point much earlier in the scaling phase. With around like 20 engineers, it's already very hard to manage the decision, to keep the context aligned, and to enable the cognitive load. It's already very challenging. And if you go above like 30, it starts to be very, very complex. So we can say that when we scale globally, ultimately those tipping points, they come much earlier in the organization maturity. The reason is because we have a synchronicity tax. When people are working on different time zones, they need to wait for each other. Then a single decision can take up to 24 hours. It's less easy to just jump in a call and solve the problem. The second issue is the context dilution. When we are working on different time zones, we can have meetings or even a Slack discussion that is happening in a totally different time zone, in the different channels, on a different perspective. And when you wake up, suddenly you receive a lot of informations and you stop being involved in the problem resolution and you start to just receiving inputs, right? So you lose the context. You are not part of the discussion anymore just because of that. And finally, we also have cultural gaps that are affecting those metrics, right? Based on our culture, based on where we were raised and born, there is different way we communicate, different way we give and receive feedback, different way we agree or disagree. And all of these, they are affecting the output of the organization. All right? So what we can say actually to summarize is that scaling is actually super hard. It's not just about hiring more people. It's about keeping a decision velocity factor very low, despite we have more people. It's about keeping the context depth, despite we have much more people involved. And it's about keeping the cognitive load reduced, despite we have a lot of people. Where do we start, actually, right? It's great to describe the problems, but where should we start? We want to scale an organization. I think one of the key elements is to start by enforcing autonomous teams. We want to build autonomous teams. So instead of having this huge cargo with a lot of containers and a lot of people, maybe instead what we should do is to build a fleet of autonomous boats that are working together, that collaborate to solve problems, right? And why we want to do that? Because if we don't build autonomous team, we are just building another feature factory. People are just so far away from the context that they are just moving tickets. Instead of solving problems, they just execute what has been decided miles away from there. If we don't build autonomous team as well, we just create another bureaucratic drag. Maybe we are good at solving problems, But to release those problems, we need to go through so many approval layers that we are just disconnected from what is happening. It's just a nightmare. So the way to do that is actually to potentially organize the structure, and we can follow for that the team topology framework. It's been popularized basically 5 or 6 years ago, and it identifies 4 kinds of teams you can have in an engineering organization. The concept relies around these 4 types, topology of teams: streamlined teams, enabling teams, complicated subsystem teams, and platform teams. One of the core elements that is really driving me is how do we build streamlined teams, right? A streamlined teams, it's a team that is completely autonomous on an end-to-end customer outcome. They work very closely with the user problems, and they are able to ship solutions autonomously. They don't need to ask for permission. They don't need to align with 5 stakeholders. They see a problem, they diagnose it, they are able to activate and solve this problem. So we need to identify those customer flows that will enable those teams to be very close to the customer and to own this customer outcome. This is one of the key elements when we adopt this organization. Another type of team is the enabling teams. From time to time, you may want to accelerate on some specific topics. You want to enable the rest of the organization to capture an innovation or to improve the architecture quality of the system. So you can have an enabling teams for a few months that address a specific topic. Can be cybersecurity, or can be as well, of course, AI adoptions, right? We will work on a task force for a couple of weeks and months, and they will share the knowledge, they will enforce best practices, and they will coach the rest of the organization. We, of course, have the platform team that will reduce the cognitive load, right, by providing services for the entire organizations, things that we can reuse, right? We don't want that every team come with their own CI/CD pipelines. We don't want that every team is reinventing the wheel with observability, monitoring, alerting. We want them instead to use self-service capacity, right? They will have a portal, they can enable quickly some concerns without having to work on that, right? And finally, in some organizations, we may be managing running systems that are quite complex, right? If you work in embedded systems, real time, if you have a mobile app, if you have a complex data platform which requires some advanced data science workload, again, you don't want to distract the streamlined team by having to manage this extra complexity. So it is acceptable to have this specialized team that will just manage this running system because it's very specific, and at the end, it doesn't affect the rest of the orgs. Okay? So when we start to design an organization, we can follow this framework. It might be useful, helpful to organize and to reduce basically the dependency. It might be useful to reduce the cognitive load, and it might help to have the right people very close to the problem we are solving. When we design streamlined teams, of course, we need to identify the value streams, right? Why our customers are buying our products? Which customer problem we are solving? What are our secret recipe? There is different strategy to approach that. Personally, I really like and enjoy using domain-driven design. It's more usually used on the software engineering side, but actually it's very appropriate. It's very good actually to also use domain-driven design to identify the value stream and to map or streamline teams across these different domains. It's very useful, it's worked pretty fine, and I think we should reuse that. So if we summarize, what we want to do is to create small teams that are organized around a product manager, and they are focused on a customer-facing outcome. If you don't have a product manager in the team will not be autonomous. They will always have to align with somebody because they don't have the decision-making power. So this is completely useless. If they don't own a customer-facing outcome, they will just ship tickets instead of solving problems. You need to embed as well all the competency required to ship autonomously. If you start to separate your teams with backend, front-end, QA, DevOps, this is not going to work. This is a disaster. So when you have a streamlined team, you need to make sure you have all the competency to make sure the team is completely independent. They have backend engineers, front-end engineers, quality, data embedded into it, so that they don't depend on anyone. And finally, when you go globally, you need to apply high engineering standards, regardless of the location. A very, very bad idea is to say, okay, let's work with a different country, let's try to onboard some people, and at some point you start to lower down your engineering standards because it's very hard to hire good people. You should not do that. You should really not do that. If it takes longer, but don't lower down your engineering standards because otherwise you cannot enforce accountability in your organizations. Every team need to rely on each other. Every team need to hold a certain standards. If you don't manage to build that, this is not going to work. For the organization, of course, you need to constantly inspect dependencies to ensure that every team is not stepping on each other's toe. And it works again with domains, scoping, but also with automation, right? So in case the team is constantly stepping over each other, maybe you need to rethink about your domains. If the cognitive load is too high, maybe you need to rethink about your platform engineering because it's not working. As the team are moving in different directions, you still want to have some coherence, right? You don't want that suddenly a team is going in radical different directions from an architecture perspective, from a technology perspective. So that's quite important as well, to organize regular rituals with hackathon, chapters, or modernization projects to ensure that we still have some coherence across the system. If you don't do that, in a few months or a few years, you will have an architecture that is completely disorganized, completely coupled, and that will not scale anymore. Finally, you need to ensure that every team, they contribute to something meaningful. If you start to have a team that is working only on cool stuff and another team that is working on not so cool stuff, again, this is not going to work, right? I see this pattern a lot. We have a team that do all the POCs. We have another team that is only doing the maintenance. This is a success disaster. I mean, you are really setting up yourself for failure. So every team, they need to have challenges and they need to have a clear path to victory. Otherwise, your organization will be very weak. So this is what we did actually in my organizations. We have structured teams with different domains. Every team, they have a specific name and a specific domains, and they are connected to outcomes. I don't care if they ship code. What I want is them to solve business problems and problems that everybody understands and business problems that are shared across the company, right? So whenever they ship something, it's connected to the revenue growth or the revenue retention or the profitability or the effectiveness of the organization. And this is how we should speak. The technology and the engineering today should serve the business. We are not just writing code for the purpose of writing code. And whenever engineers, they start to think with this approach, it makes the life of everybody much easier, right? Because we start to tackle the real value of engineers. Couple of recommendations. When you will draft your organization, the boundaries, the domain, they will change, okay? It's not something that you can define once for all, and it's okay not to be clear about everything. So it's better to just align on principle instead of setting boundaries that you cannot move, and to revisit from time to time the ownership. If we see that we have two teams that constantly step on each other's toe, let's have a discussion, because sometimes maybe the boundaries, they can be changed, even if it sounds counterintuitive. We need to go through these difficulties instead of trying to plan everything in advance. When you work globally and remotely, writing should be the default communication path, right? It's just mandatory that everybody must written something before they ask questions. So you need to formalize product requirements. You need to formalize the way we provide asynchronous updates. You need to define how we write proper tickets. You need to define how we make change requests. If you don't do that, this is just a circus, right? Because people jump into calls, they forget to update each other, and it's not working. So you need to enforce communication per default. Engineers must be able to explain the problem they want to solve, what they have tried, what is working, and what the hypothesis they have. It's only after they have written something that they can ask for help, all right? And finally, we want to make sure that every team is reflecting the company structure. So you need to make sure that in every team, you have members from different time zones, right? You want to avoid to create silos when you have one team that is just located in the same country, another team located in another country. This is not going to work. What you want is to build a distributed mindset. You want to make sure that people understand how to work asynchronously. And second of all, you want robustness. You want that if somebody is deploying something on this team, we are able to fix on the same day if there is an issue. It can only happen if you have a team that is composed of members spanning across different time zones. So don't fall into the trap to say, look, we have a team in Vietnam, they will only do that. Team in Thailand, team in Egypt, it's a mistake. All right? For the organization, you need to establish synchronization loop on a regular basis to prevent silos, because people, they will be busy on their goal and they stop looking at the right and the left. So you need to make sure it happens. And also to enforce some pace, a momentum. You need to organize sprint review as well, because the systems start to move very fast. You have suddenly a lot of new features, new screen, new APIs, new systems. You want to make sure that the progress are visible for everybody. You want to make sure that we discuss about the impacts, the benefits, and not only about what has been produced. And finally, you want to make sure that those rituals, they actually happened, right? If you let people just organize themselves, there is high chance that when there is a huge time zone differences, those calls will never happen because people are busy. So you need to block the calendar of everybody in advance, and you need to make those rituals batch and properly happening. Otherwise, it will not happen, and we will always be in a reactive approach for collaboration. It's not super good. So now that we have discussed about how we could shape the organization, I think it's important to tackle a second problem. How do we bridge cultural gaps? Depending on our citizenship, nationality, where we are grew up, there is different way we handle information sharing. There is different perspective about how do we give and receive feedback. There is different way to accept or to refuse, to express disagreements. We need to be aware about that. Otherwise, we are creating situations where people are speaking perfectly good English, but they don't understand each other. I give you an example, right? We jump into a meeting and we have the feeling that we are aligned, but actually nobody is aligned, right? So we say, okay, everybody acknowledge, everybody nods. So we think we are aligned, but actually we are not aligned at the end of the meeting. And the week after, we are revisiting what has been discussed. Another thing that happened is the clarity illusion. No question was asked during the meeting, so we assume it's clear while it's not, right? And the reason for that is because depending on the culture we are living in, there is different way we behave in terms of communications, feedback, disagreements, and it has been popularized by the culture map, right, from Erin Meyer. In this book, basically, she analyzed across 8 different factors how each culture is behaving, right? How, for example, we have culture that have low context versus high context communication. How some culture, they prefer direct feedback versus indirect feedback. How do they value the trust? Some culture, they value trust based on the task, the performance, the professionalism. Some culture, they value trust based on the relationships, right? And I think it's important to understand this map when we work with a lot of different cultures together. Otherwise, they will speak English, perfectly good English, but they will not understand each other. I give you an example that is very, very common. we're asking a team, okay, would it be possible to have this done by Friday, right? And we have an engineer that is answering us, oh, Friday? It's going to be a bit difficult. We have a lot of work to do. We have many unexpected workload. That's it, basically. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, right? In a low context culture, people will assume, oh, we may have something on Friday. It sounds reasonable, right? It seems to be acceptable. But actually, the engineer that answered us just said it was impossible. He just said no, but without saying no, right? And the reason is because we have culture that are operating in low context versus high context. Low context means that those cultures, they value a very clear, simple messages. What I just wrote to you is what I mean, right? I value directness. I am asking you, is it possible on Friday? I just expect you to say yes or no. In high context culture, the message is just a package. People will seek for the hidden information. They will try to second guess what is the intention, right? They will feel the room. They will read between the lines. And most of the time, it will not be so direct. It's not that one is better than another. It's just a different perspective about how do we approach communication. Some culture, they value directness. It's okay to repeat a message to be clear because I want to be responsible that everybody understands what I'm saying. In some other culture, repetition is really bad. If you repeat a message, it means that I'm not smart enough to understand what you are just saying. So the responsibility is shifting between who is speaking and who is listening. Another issue might be about how do we deal with feedback. I'm sure you are all familiar with postmortem. We have an incident on the platform, and then at the end, we have the manager that say, oh, look, it was a little bit unfortunate. Maybe next time we could do better. Maybe we could have a checklist. We want to avoid those small hiccups. Again, different way to receive this message. Some people will just assume, oh, it doesn't sound that important, right? You are just making some recommendation. I don't see the urgency in it. But in some other culture, it's really, really bad. If your manager is saying that, it means that we have to fix it immediately. This is very, very urgent, very important. So people may receive this completely differently. And it's because in some culture, we value direct negative feedback. We like to be direct, we like to be precise. We don't mind using a strong word like this is unacceptable, this is totally unprofessional. It's not bad to be precise and direct. While in some other country, a negative feedback must be a little bit taken carefully. Probably it will not happen in public. Probably we will use diminishing words. We will try to be more diplomatic. So again, if you don't understand this, it will be very hard to understand what we are expecting, right, in terms of SLAs, in terms of urgency. Because again, if we look at this post-mortem conversation, some might think there is no problem and it's okay, we can just try to improve. Some other, they will act immediately to fix it. The small talk, right? It's a very funny exercise, and depending on the culture you're operating with, different perspective, right? Some people will say this is completely useless. Why do we have to spend 30 minutes talking about kids, about families, about your last weekends? I just want to get it done, right? It feels like a waste of time. And some other culture, if you don't do that, you will be perceived as, okay, you are just expecting me to execute something. You don't care about who I am. And again, it's because depending on the culture, we value the performance differently. Some culture, we are professional because our performance is measured by the task. We perform, we deliver consistently, and then the trust is built by how professional I am, how organized I am, how fast I deliver. Can you rely on me? Some other culture, they absolutely don't care about how you deliver and if you are reliable. What they will value is, can they trust you on a personal level? What kind of relationship? Do you understand them? It's very common that in Asia, for example, we like to do business with friends. We do business with friends. It's very common that in Europe and the US, business is just business, right? We don't have to be friends, right? So it's very, very important to understand that because the expectation, again, will be very different. Task-based versus relationship-based. Finally, the architecture review, right? Very common exercise. We are reviewing the architecture and we have somebody that say, oh, the approach is completely inadequate. We are using that, but this is really bad. It will kill our latency, blah, blah, blah. Again, depending on who is approaching that, it's very different. In some culture, it's great to have a debate in the team. It's like to challenge each other, right? If we challenge each other, if we disagree, this is great. This is awesome. It means we trust each other. It means that we get a great outcome. But in some culture, it feels really, really bad, right? It means that, okay, I did a very bad work. You have to correct me. I have to fix it. It means that you humiliated me in front of everyone. Probably next time I will not do such things. I will stop proposing ideas. And again, it's because some culture, they value confrontations, while some other culture, they avoid confrontation and they want to preserve harmony, right? So in France, for example, it's very, very common for people to argue. It's part of the process, and it's valuable to argue. If we don't argue, it means that we have not done a good job, right? We need to discuss, to challenge, to debate. In some other culture, debating sounds completely unproductive. It means that you are destroying the harmony of the group. It means that you are very emotional, you are very unprofessional, you cannot control yourself, right? So again, some architecture review with different kind of people, you will have some very strange reaction, right? And this is something you need to be aware to pair people correctly or to set up the tone before the meeting starts. So a couple of recommendations. When you hire globally, you need to raise the hiring bar, right? You cannot just say, look, let's hire whoever we can, right? It's not the point. The organization become much more complex. And then we should not only focus on the technical skills. At this scale, the communication and the ability to adapt is much more important than just the individual contribution, right? So you need to raise the hiring bar. There is no other choice. Otherwise, you will have constantly escalation, frustration within the organization because people don't trust each other and they are not equipped to deal with this complexity. You need to build as well cultural awareness. You cannot just grow globally if you don't onboard properly the people and if you don't coach them and give them feedback about how they communicate, how they should behave, how to address to each other. That's mandatory. Finally, you need to make sure that you onboard the entire company, not just the engineering team, right? In my case, for example, the sales and the marketing function, they are in the US. We have the engineering and product team in Vietnam, in Ukraine. And then if you don't onboard the entire company to learn how we should communicate together, how do we handle urgencies, what are the SLAs, how to approach feedback, it starts to be very, very frustrating for a lot of people. So you need to onboard the entire company to make sure that it's working within the organization, engineering organization, but also with other teams. All right? Finally, when we build such an organization, I think it's very, very important to build the psychological safety. We need to nurture that, right? Because people which are not English native speaker, they will perceive what has been said very differently, right? And it's very, very complicated. We can have escalation that comes in a very unnecessary way. For example, it may happen that we have some teams that say, oh, look, their code is completely unusable, we don't need them, right? It's very, very terrible to say that, but it happens. Or, for example, we think that nobody cares because they are so far away from our daily reality, from our battles, that, yeah, we just assume they don't care. They just don't understand what we are trying to do, right? And this is something we need to fight actively when we build such an organization. A way to do that is to use what we call non-violent communication. Right? It's a very popular method that has been provided by Rosenberg. In this protocol to communicate, we basically move and change the way we phrase things. Instead of just speaking about basically emotions, we will speak about facts and observation. Instead of judging people, we will explain how it affects us. Instead of trying to manipulate people, we will just express what we need them to do. And finally, instead of asking them to do something, we will invite them in the resolution process. I can give you a very easy example that probably most of you have faced, right? We have someone, you're organizing a meeting, he arrives like 20 minutes late, and here we have two choices, right? Maybe you will just say, oh, you're just always late, and you don't care about my time, you don't respect me. This is what we could be tempted to tell the people. But instead, what we should do is to say, look, let's just speak about the fact and the observation. I see that you arrived 20 minutes late. That's it. It's a fact. No judgments, no emotion. It's a fact. You're 20 minutes late. Then instead of just escalating things by saying, oh, you're disrespectful, you just explain that, look, when you arrive late, I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm anxious because I don't know where you are. I have the feeling we are wasting time. This is what I feel. It's not intentional that you wanted to be disrespectful. But by being late, this is what it creates in me. This is my emotion. And finally, you could say, look, maybe you need to do better, right? I think this is the worst advice ever. And instead, we should explain what we need. We need as a team to be reliable. We need to trust each other. We need to respect our schedule. When you arrive late, not only it's not disrespectful, but it's create a wrong feeling for everybody. And we need to be reliable as a team. We need to trust each other. And finally, instead of just saying, okay, just don't do it again, we are inviting to build together a solution. Okay? So it sounds a little bit complicated, but actually it's very simple. It's just to de-escalate the communication in a way that we just speak about facts, observations, we speak about emotions, we speak about what is the need, and to formulate a request at the end to solve the problem together. So a couple of examples, right, that I hear in some teams when usually they reach a lot of frustration. They always block processes. They never listen. We need to fix their mistake. They are not open-minded. All of these terms should be avoided because you immediately escalate the intensity. You immediately are much more violent in your communication. So we should avoid that. And instead, we should just speak about like facts, emotions, needs, and requests. Another aspect as well is to foster inclusiveness. You cannot just expect people to feel home when they are very far away from your headquarters, when they don't understand your culture, they don't understand your company, they don't understand the market you address, they don't understand your industry. You cannot just expect them to do everything on the end. You have to be inclusive in the way you design your organization. One way to do that is language. Instead of using they, us versus we should be inclusive. We should always say we together, we are on the same boat. Our product team, our colleagues. The idea is to avoid to segregate people just by this tweak in the languages. Finally, I usually encourage people to not name team after the locations. It's too easy to say, oh, the Vietnam team, the Thai team, the Egypt team, the Germany team. It's not good because, again, we are only limiting people toward where they're located. instead of the problem they are trying to solve for the company. So I prefer to say the identity team, the apps team. It's much better because it creates a feeling of belongings instead of just the location. We should frame failure collectively. If one team fail, we all fail together. They didn't mess it up. We fail together. So that's very important that everybody work together the same goals and we frame the failure collectively. That's very, very important. And finally, we should just embrace the diversity, the cultural diversity as a norm, right? If it's a norm and it's a default that we acknowledge the cultural diversity we have, everybody will just live by this value, right? So what we are doing usually in our team is that we use different gradings. We celebrate traditions. We ask ourselves questions about languages. We acknowledge time zone constantly. When we start a meeting, we're always asking, okay, what time is it on your ends? Is that okay with you? Should we adjust the meeting for next time? That's very important to show people that you understand where they live and you connect them to your organization. Finally, as well, it's great to celebrate cultural moments, right? It happened that over the last 8 months, I've been working for the first time with American people. I had no clue until then what was Thanksgiving. I think until today, I'm still confused, right? But that's okay, right? I ask questions, we try to understand, and I think this is great. Same for Tet holidays in Vietnam, the Lunar New Year. This is a concept that nobody understands except in Asia, because this is only in Asia that we are celebrating the lunar calendar, right? So if you make it a default, people will live by those values, and it will already create a very robust organization. So to summarize, when we want to scale globally, when we want to keep the coherence across time zone, we need absolutely to build autonomous teams, teams that are able to make decisions on their own, that are able to move fast, that are connected to a customer outcome. We need to bridge cultural gaps by acknowledging our differences, training and coaching the people, guiding toward how we communicate, how do we give and receive feedback, how do we handle disagreements, and how do we accept and refuse requests. And finally, we need to create this safety environment when it's okay to fail, when it's okay to work together, and when it's okay to take risk. If you don't create this safety, people will be averse to take risk. They will not try to win. They will just try to cover their ass, right? And it's not what you want. So now you might ask yourself, in case I want to scale my organization, should I scale locally? Should I scale globally? I think it's a little bit depending on the vision you have, right? If you are just looking for a very short period of time, scaling globally is probably too complex for you. If you want to invest on sustainable growth and robustness, I have the conviction today that scaling globally is the way to go. When you leverage talent from different time zones, you become more robust. When you invite different perspectives, different cultures to solve the problems, you increase basically the resolution space for your problems. It's more diverse, it's more interesting, it's more challenging. So ultimately, you will move a little bit slower, but the whole organization will move much farther. You will be able to solve much more complex problems. You will be able to approach innovative solutions because it's a gymnastic for everybody to work in such a diverse environment. I would like to remind you the three references that have been really driving over these years: the culture map that we discussed about, the team topologies, and the non-violent communications. Great books. I highly recommend you to read it in case you're working in such environments. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be very happy to take a few questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone who has questions? All right. Oh, there.
すごく勉強になりました。ありがとうございます。 私はベトナムの
Okay. Sorry.
ありがとうございます。とてもいい講演聞かせていただいてありがとうございます。私は、よくベトナムのメンバーと、働いています。で、これからうちの会社はインドの支社だったり、韓国の支社だったりできそうな雰囲気があるので、今回のお話とても勉強になりました。1個質問があります。そうですね、よく拠点が違うところでチームで起こるのがオフラインのコミュニケーションが例えば日本だけで行われて、何か決まってしまって後でベトナムチームと情報の持っている情報の違いが出てしまうっていうことがあります。で、そうですね、とはいえそのオフラインのコミュニケーションもちょっと大事だなっていう価値観もあったりします。ここをちょっとリーダーとしてもし埋めるのであればこうどういう伝え方をチームメンバーにするといいんでしょうか。
Thank you very much. I think it's a great question. So thank you for asking. And the question was, in case we are mixing teams from different locations, right? For example, Japan and Vietnam, and we have discussion happening in one office, how do we make sure that we don't lose the information when we convey it to another locations, right? So how do we mix both working locally and globally when we need to collaborate actively? I think it's a great question. What we usually do on our end was basically to define topics when the discussion should happen remotely. And in that case, everybody should join the meeting remotely, right? So even if you are sitting in the same office, everybody is going into the same Zoom meeting or Google Meet meeting, so that the people that are not joining, they don't feel that they miss any information. I think this is the first crucial point. The second aspect is that when we work with software engineering concerns, you are absolutely correct. It's a highly collaborative environment, and there is value to just sit in the same room, to use a whiteboard, and to discuss about problem. I fully agree with you. It brings a lot of value. And so here, when we need to combine both, I think it's important to segregate the domains. What can be handled locally? What should be handled globally? So it's just a question about how do we scope what is happening only in Japan because there is some specific concern that should be addressed there. What should happen only in Vietnam because it makes sense. And what are the areas where we overlap, right? So there is no perfect solution, unfortunately. It will be just a question about how do we model the domains and the scope for teams.
Thank you.